NUS. It was past midnight when she headed home after a grueling shift at the roadside diner. The rural routes in upstate New York were steeped in absolute darkness, the kind of impenetrable blackness where the headlights barely pierce the gloom like a knife through thick fabric. Her battered Honda Civic bounced over potholes, and the radio spewed only static, as reception was a luxury in these parts. Exhaustion weighed her down like lead. Her eyelids grew heavy, but she craved only one thing: to get home, dive into a warm bed, and erase this endless day from memory. A day filled with the smell of frying grease and sweat clinging to her skin. The only compass in this obscurity was the GPS, its mechanical voice monotonously dictating, "Turn left in 500 feet." She relied on it implicitly, a grave mistake. Suddenly the device beeped. "Turn right onto unmarked road." She frowned, puzzled. An unmarked road? Ahead she saw only solid walls of trees and a scattering of gravel under the wheels. The screen flickered, trace in a jagged red line leading into oblivion. Slowing down, she peered into the blackness. Indeed, there lurked a narrow dirt track, barely wide enough for her car, winding deep into the forest like a hidden vein. She hesitated, but exhaustion clouded her judgment, preventing her from weighing the risks. "Fine," she whispered to herself, turning the wheel. The path turned out to be a nightmare. The car lurched from side to side, hitting boulders and protruding roots, and the treetops closed overhead like a maw, branches scratching the body like clawed fingers. The GPS went blank, then flickered, recalculating route, repeating the phrase in an endless loop. She cursed under her breath and tried to turn around, but the path squeezed her in its narrow grip. Suddenly, there was a sharp jolt. The car shuddered and stopped. The engine sputtered and died. The key in the ignition didn't respond. No sound, except for the quiet ticking of cooling metal. The phone in her hand was silent. No signal bars. Of course, she was stuck in the wild thicket, girdled by dense forest, without the slightest idea of her location. Nevertheless, she dialed roadside assistance, and, by an incredible twist of fate, the call went through. The operator assured her that a tow truck would arrive in an hour, a whole hour. She locked the doors, leaned back in her seat, and tried to compose herself. The forest breathed with an ominous silence. No chirping of crickets, no hooting of owls, only a viscous stillness that sent cold shivers down her spine like a premonition of disaster. And then she caught it, a crunch, as if someone had stepped on a carpet of dry leaves. Her head snapped to the side, her gaze darting around the windows. Nothing except for the bottomless darkness. Another crunch, now closer from the right. Her pulse pounded in a frantic rhythm. She fumbled for her phone, activated the flashlight, and illuminated the side window. The beam tore gnarled branches and thorny bushes from the gloom, but nothing more. "It's an animal," she told herself. "A deer, probably." However, the footsteps resumed, unhurried, deliberate, circling the car as if stalking it. She froze, her fingers digging into the steering wheel. The footsteps stopped at the rear bumper. She didn't dare to turn around. Her breathing quickened when the crunch sounded on the left, by the driver's door. Phone clutched in her palm. She was ready to hit 911, but the signal vanished. The footsteps subsided, and in the corner of the headlight's visibility, a shadow flickered. She squinted, straining her eyes, and suddenly a face appeared at the window. A scream tore from her throat. The phone nearly slipped from her grasp. Before her stood a man, thin, gaunt, with a pale, dirt-smeared face. His eyes burned with a mad gleam, sunken as if he hadn't closed his eyelids in an eternity. He pressed his palms against the glass, knuckles bruised, in fresh cuts and blood. "Please," he croaked, his voice muffled but full of entreaty. "I need your help. Please open it." Her heart threatened to burst from her chest. "Who are you?" she shouted, not moving an inch. "I'm lost," he replied, his tone cracked. "I've been out here for days. I need help. Please." He drummed on the glass with redoubled force, leaving streaks of dirt and blood like marks of despair. His gaze pierced her, pleading, but with a hint of something sinister, pupils dilated to the limit, empty as bottomless wells. "Get away!" she yelled, her voice breaking with fear. She called for help, but the echo of her words was swallowed by the thicket. "They're coming," he slurred. His fists continued to pound, the blows echoing dully. "Open the door. I won't hurt you. I just need to get out of here." There was a feverish quality in his tone, but beneath it lurked something else, a low, growling undertone that made everything inside her clench into a knot. She reached for her phone to call roadside assistance again, but the display was frozen. The man stopped knocking and pressed his face against the window, his breath fogging the surface. "They're out there," he whispered, his pupils darting toward the shadows of the trees. "They're watching." "Who?" she choked out, her throat burned with dryness. There was no answer. He just stared, his lips twitching in a spasm. Suddenly, he recoiled, his neck jerking as if in response to an unheard call. She followed his gaze. The forest stood motionless. Muttering incoherent words, he lunged into the thicket. The figure dissolved into the darkness like a ghost. She remained sitting, trembling, her fingers gripping the steering wheel with a death grip. The silence now seemed even more frightening, dense, oppressive, as if the air had thickened into a suffocating fog. Her gaze was riveted to the spot where he had disappeared, waiting for him to return. Time stretched, whether 10 minutes or 20. The phone came to life with a vibration, making her jump. A call from the tow truck driver. "I'm 5 minutes away," he said. "Are you okay?" She was confused, not knowing what to say. When the tow truck's headlights finally tore through the forest thicket, relief washed over her in a wave bordering on tears. The driver, a stocky guy named Mike, hooked the cable to her car and asked what had happened. She told him about the strange man, the footsteps in the dark, the insistent knocking. He frowned, sweeping the surroundings with his flashlight. "There's no one here," he stated. "Are you sure you saw someone?" She nodded, but doubt crept into her soul. Was it just a hallucination from exhaustion? The smudges on the glass had vanished, as if they had never been there at all. Mike towed the car to a repair shop and gave her a ride home. She spent that night sleepless. Every rustle in the walls echoed those footsteps. Every shadow in the corner resembled that gaunt face with mad eyes. The next morning, she dove into the internet, searching for news of missing persons in the area. Nothing matched her memories, but she came across a forum thread dedicated to that stretch of road. Other car owners shared similar stories, the GPS going crazy, luring them onto nameless paths to nowhere. One driver swore he had seen a silhouette in the thicket, staring at him. He described the forest as a living creature, holding its breath, waiting for prey. Since then, she avoids that route, preferring the wide highways, even with the extra miles. But sometimes, alone late at night, she imagines it again. A quiet crunch, like footsteps on brittle leaves, right outside the window, lurking. Darkness reigned outside. The woman left her bedroom plunged into shadows when she went to bed on a Tuesday night in mid-September at approximately 2:10 a.m. She knew the time exactly because of the scarlet numbers on her digital alarm clock that glowed on the wall, casting a faint glimmer. Her beagle Reggie lifted his head from the foot of the bed. At first, he only sniffed the air, his ears perked forward alertly, and then a low growl rumbled from deep within his throat. Reggie almost never growled inside the house. They lived in a cozy single-story ranch on a quiet street, where at night the loudest thing was usually the roar of a passing motorcycle, echoing in the stillness. She whispered to him to be quiet, but the dog didn't heed her, his gaze fixed on the narrow gap between the bedroom door and the jamb. The growl intensified, turning into a real snarl that made the mattress vibrate beneath her. The woman figured maybe a raccoon was rummaging in the gutter outside, looking for food or shelter. She put her hand on his back, feeling the muscles tense and twitch beneath his fur, and decided it would be wiser to let him deal with it in the morning. She shushed him again. The growl only subsided with the first glimmers of dawn filtering through the heavy curtains. The next night, Reggie woke her again at exactly 2:13 a.m. with the same menacing low warning. This time, he stood up on his paws, his tail straight, and his nose pointed firmly at the door. Her heart beat faster, but she tried to convince herself it was just a coincidence. After all, dogs pick up on a lot of sounds that are inaudible to humans, from the rustling of leaves to distant footsteps. However, the repeating alarm made her worried enough to turn on the bedside lamp and leave it on until morning. The third night turned any attempts to dismiss it into futile illusions. Reggie's internal clock worked with the precision of clockwork. No sooner had she reached for the light switch than his bark pierced the night silence like a siren. She slipped out of bed, grabbed the aluminum flashlight from the bedside table, and pressed her ear to the door. Absolute silence. No breath of wind, no rustling, no sound of a departing car, and yet the dog's body trembled at her feet like a tightly wound spring, ready to uncoil. She opened the door just 2 inches. Reggie instantly squeezed through the gap and trotted down the hallway. His claws tapped softly on the laminate flooring until he stopped at the threshold of the living room. She followed him, the flashlight beam sweeping across the walls and floor. Reggie stood tense, his shoulders low, and his gaze fixed on the far right corner where the TV stand met the wall. That corner was completely empty, just a stack of old magazines and the door to the coat closet. She swept the light from side to side. Nothing moved. She was about to breathe a sigh of relief when Reggie suddenly let out a sharp, staccato bark. Her gaze fell to the floor and she saw it. One clear barefoot print, from the left heel to the right toe, imprinted on the light laminate, as if someone had walked through wet earth and stepped inside. The print looked very fresh, with crumbs of dirt scattered around the outline, like traces of a recent intrusion. Adrenaline instantly flooded her veins, making her limbs numb with the surge of power. She backed toward the hallway, keeping the beam of light fixed on the ominous track. It didn't make sense. All the windows were securely locked. The sliding door in the living room had a sturdy bolt, firmly inserted into the groove. She herded Reggie back into the bedroom, slammed the door, and propped it with the nearest chair to create an additional barrier. Then she dialed 911. She had never had to call the police before. Her voice trembled as she explained, haltingly, that there might be an intruder hiding in the house. The dispatcher strictly ordered her to stay in the room, not to hang up, and to wait for the officers to arrive. 10 minutes stretched into an eternity, broken only by Reggie's quiet whimpering and her ragged breathing echoing in her ears. When the patrol officers finally arrived, they loudly announced their presence and then methodically searched the house, room by room. She heard closet doors banging, the attic hatch being lowered with a characteristic creak. They turned on the bright lights in the garage, inspecting every corner. Finally, they knocked on her bedroom door. She moved the chair, and 2 patrol officers entered the room. One of them carefully examined the footprint. The other, meanwhile, asked questions, clarifying details. They found no signs of forced entry, no scratches on the frames, no damaged locks. They collected a sample of the dirt in a clear plastic bag for analysis and walked the entire perimeter of the house outside, but found no matching prints on the ground. Reggie pressed against her calf, continuing to growl softly, especially when the officer approached that very corner in the living room. The police left around 4 a.m., advising her to install a video, a surveillance camera, and call immediately if she noticed anything suspicious. She didn't close her eyes. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding the flashlight upright like an improvised candle, and listened to every tick of the wall clock, counting the seconds in the tense silence. The next day, she hurried to the electronics store, bought a motion-activated camera, and installed it, pointing the lens at the living room. She thoroughly vacuumed and mopped the entire floor, erasing every speck of dust and trace. That night, she tried to think logically, double-locking all the entrances, but the all-consuming anxiety didn't even allow her to take off her shoes. She left them on her feet, right in bed, ready to flee. At 2:13 a.m., Reggie's roar tore through the night again. Her stomach clenched. The camera on her phone beeped almost simultaneously. Motion detected. In the living room. She touched the notification. Live video was streaming in the dim light, but it was not. Empty. In the upper left corner of the frame, a blurred silhouette, almost human-sized, slowly floated across before disappearing from view. The recording froze for 3 seconds and then continued, showing only the stationary furniture, the sofa, the table, and the shelves. This time she didn't open the door. She called 911 again, her voice barely louder than a whisper, trembling with horror. The dispatcher recognized the address before she even managed to say it completely. The officers arrived faster, but the result was the same. No intruder, no damage, no reasonable explanation, only a second dirty footprint, this one closer to the hallway, as if a continuation of an invisible path. The police hinted that maybe she was suffering from sleepwalking, or even staging a hoax for attention. But she knew exactly what she had seen on the video, even though the clip now showed only static noise instead of a silhouette. Nevertheless, she still handed over the file even though it looked damaged, with artifacts all over the frame. The next day, she spent hours at the hardware store, buying heavy bolts, window sensors, and powerful floodlights for outdoor lighting. A technician helped reset the camera system, clearing it of possible glitches. By sunset, every door in the house gleamed with fresh steel, and a GPS tag was attached to Reggie's collar in case something drove him outside in a panic. That night, A premonition of disaster squeezed her chest as the hands of the clock inexorably approached 2:13. Reggie snored peacefully beside her, his chest rising and falling rhythmically. She stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds to herself. When the minute hand reached the mark, silence lasted 10 seconds. 20, 30, without a single growl. Relief began to spread through her body, a warm wave. But then the motion alert rang louder than usual, piercing the air. The phone screen lit up with an image from the living room. The video shook, as if someone had grabbed the camera and was shaking it. It tilted toward the hallway until the lens was filled with Reggie's empty water bowl, sitting on the floor. Then the picture suddenly went black, leaving darkness. Reggie jumped up, baring his teeth in fury. The roar burst out at full power, even deeper and more menacing than before. But it wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from behind. The dog turned sharply toward the closets in the bedroom. From inside, there was a dull thud, as if a heavy object had landed on the floor with a crash. She gripped the flashlight and phone, cautiously moved to the door and turned the handle. Reggie lunged forward first, outstripping her. She followed, the beam of light darting in panic, and found only disordered stacks of boxes and coats hanging on hangers. No one. But there, on the carpeted floor of the closet, was another dirty footprint, toes pointing directly into the corner of the bedroom where she had just been, sleeping. She recoiled, her heart pounding in her temples, and rushed into the bathroom, the only room with a solid door and without a single window, an ideal refuge. Reggie squeezed in after her, pressing against her legs. She called the police for the third time and firmly stated that she would not leave the bathroom until dawn and the arrival of several squads for a thorough search. They combed the house for 2 hours, even with the help of a specially trained tracker dog whose barks echoed through the corridors. Nothing. The officers had to admit that they had not the slightest explanation for the mysterious footprints or the failed camera, which now seemed to be completely out of order. She filed an official report and left the house in the morning, driving to her sister across town to wait out the turmoil. There, she hired a professional security company to install a full alarm system with sensors and cameras. The specialists found no defects in the wiring, no blind spots in the coverage. However, they did record several partial fingerprints at the vents and under the hatch to the crawl space, hinting at possible entry points that no one had noticed before. She refuses to spend another night there until she finds out whose footprints they are and why they keep appearing without the slightest sound. The woman lives alone in a modest rented house on the edge of town, close enough to the road that car headlights occasionally pierce the walls of her bedroom in the dark. Her daily routine is simple and measured. She works the late shift at the grocery store, returns home after 11 at night, heats up dinner, and falls asleep to the quiet hum of the television. No surprises or adventures intrude on this peaceful life. That's why the first message immediately caught her attention. It came exactly at midnight last Wednesday from an unknown number. "Your package has been delivered to the front porch." She sat bolt upright in bed. She hadn't ordered anything. Nevertheless, curiosity compelled her to open the front door. The porch was empty, except for the welcome mat and a handful of withered leaves brought by the wind. She attributed it to a random sender error, carefully locked the door, and returned to bed. The next night, the signal repeated at the same hour. Package delivered. Uncontrollable curiosity pushed her outside again. Again, nothing. She deleted the notification and told herself to forget about it. But on the third night, the content changed. Package delivered under your bed. Shivers ran down her spine at these ominous words. Grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, she illuminated the space under the frame. There was only dust and a forgotten sock. No trace of a package, but now sleep became an unattainable luxury. She kept the flashlight by her pillow, holding her breath until the first rays of dawn. The fourth night brought a new shock. The message arrived while she was brushing her teeth after her shift. Package delivered to your closet. Her pulse pounded in her temples with redoubled force. She headed to the closet in the bedroom, flung open the door, and stared at the familiar clutter of hanging clothes. To dispel any doubts, she checked every hanger, feeling the shelves and shoeboxes. Nothing suspicious was hiding among the shirts or shoes. As she stepped away, her phone vibrated again. Thank you for checking. Furious, she threw the gadget on the dresser and sat down on the bed, gasping for air. From that moment on, she acquired an inexpensive motion-activated camera aimed at the front steps. She wanted to get some evidence, or at least see the face of the prankster. In addition, she prepared a small hammer, placing it by the bed to feel less defenseless in the face of the unknown. The fifth night was Saturday. She tried her best not to close her eyes, aimlessly flipping through pages on her laptop while waiting. Exactly at 8 p.m., the click of the front door lock sounded, followed by a drawn-out, ominous creak. The door slowly opened, her throat constricted with horror. She turned off the lamp and froze, listening to the silence. A lonely step sounded on the wooden floor, and then a dead pause. Clutching the hammer in her hand, with her heart pounding like a drum, she crept down the hallway. The living room was empty. The door hung ajar, letting in the cold night air. The woman slammed it shut, locked all the bolts, and walked around every window and room in search of traces. Nothing. In the bedroom, the phone suddenly lit up. Check outside. Her hands trembled. She weighed the options. Call 911 or finally meet face to face with the one who was playing this elaborate game. Against her will and common sense, she unlocked the door and went out onto the porch. There, by the railing, a figure loomed, half hidden by the shadow of a column. The stranger stepped into the circle of light from the street lamp, and a familiar smirk bloomed on his face. Surprise, he said with a quiet laugh. It was Nicholas, a childhood friend from the same neighborhood where they grew up together. She hadn't seen him in almost 10 years. The connection broke after school when he suddenly left town over some minor theft charges. She lowered the hammer, but didn't unclench her fingers. "What are you doing here?" she asked in an even voice. He shrugged with feigned carelessness. "Just wanted to say hello. Figured a normal knock on the door wouldn't interest you." She stared at him in amazement. "You're the one who sent all those texts." He chuckled, shifting from foot to foot. "Thought it would be funny." But nothing from the past week evoked even a shadow of a smile. She demanded an explanation, how he got her number, how he knew her address, and why he thought it was appropriate to scare her half to death. Nicholas just shook his head, cleverly dodging direct answers. He reeked of cheap beer and cigarette smoke. However, something else was alarming her deeper. The camera should have recorded his approach today, But what about previous nights? Had he been wandering inside the house while she slept? Messages about the closet, about the space under the bed, flashed through her mind. "Have you ever been inside?" she said sharply. Nicholas's smile instantly faded. He glanced past her into the darkening doorway of the house. "You always slept like a log," he muttered almost inaudibly. She gripped the hammer tighter. "Get off my porch." He raised his hands in a gesture of feigned surrender. Okay, no offense, just wanted to meet up." She stepped forward, pushing him toward the steps. The smile didn't leave his face, but there was an icy detachment in his eyes that hadn't been in their childhood games. Halfway down, he stopped. "Watch your phone," he whispered quietly before dissolving into the night shadows. She listened until the echo of his footsteps faded down the street. Returning inside, she slid all the bolts and propped the door with a chair for good measure. Then she called the police, reporting an unwanted visitor trespassing on her property. Officers arrived in 10 minutes, thoroughly inspected the yard, and reviewed the camera footage. The video clearly showed Nicholas stepping onto the porch at 11:58, unlocking the door, and standing in the doorway for a full 6 seconds before retreating. That was enough to qualify as trespassing, they noted, but an arrest required her statement in court. She signed the necessary papers. The police filed a report and assured her that they would increase patrols in the neighborhood. When they left, she tried to close her eyes. The hammer was still by her pillow, but at 3:07 a.m., the phone vibrated to life. "Final delivery completed," the words on the screen read. No location given, no clues, only this concise phrase. Her stomach clenched. She once again searched the locks, the space under the bed, the closet, and found nothing. Dawn finally dispelled the darkness, but the message echoed in her thoughts like an ominous premonition. In the morning, she replaced the locks, added additional bolts, and ordered a complete security system. She also contacted a couple of former classmates. One of them revealed that Nicholas had been arrested a year ago for breaking into his colleague's apartment. He had hidden there, waiting for her to fall asleep. He got 6 months probation for that, and disappeared from town immediately afterward. Since that night, there had been no sign of him.